Okay, so today I'm reviewing the JBL Classic L52s, and the big question is, are these speakers legitimately worth the money, or are they simply overpriced nostalgia boxes? Let's talk. Alright guys, so here it is, the JBL L52, a speaker that looks like it was taken straight from the 1970s. I mean seriously, every time I look at it, I can't help but think about shaggy carpets, lava lamps, and tacky wood paneling on walls. And really, that's the whole point behind the Classic series, is to evoke both the aesthetic and sound of something from a bygone era, of a time when people, especially young people, used to listen to music as a primary form of entertainment. Before cell phones and before television became a big thing, friends would rush over to each other's homes as soon as their favorite band or artist released a new album so they could listen to it together and share that experience together. And as a music lover and audiophile, that makes me nostalgic for a time that I never even lived. And while a product like this certainly isn't going to change how young people live today in 2023, it's nonetheless cool to see something that pays homage to that era that you can buy today. And that leads me to the design of this speaker. So it is the smallest within the Classic lineup, and like most small speakers, that means it relies on a two-way design. So let's go ahead and take a look at the drivers first. Up top, we are going to have a titanium dome tweeter, and then on the bottom, we have a 5¼ inch paper cone woofer. There's going to be a port up front, and then the big feature that I like here is the treble attenuation switch. So if you're somebody like me and you just don't like a lot of high frequency jammed into your ear canals, you don't have to put up with that with this speaker. You can adjust it to taste, as I have done here. Something that I'm going to comment on later on in this review. Now, on the back of the speaker, you have a set of 5-way binding posts. And when it comes to overall build quality, I think it is good for what it is. I think the application of the light walnut veneer seems to be well applied. No, it's not fancy, but then again, speakers back then weren't fancy either. Now, when it comes to the colors of the grills, you can get it in 3 different colors. You have the option of getting it in orange, like you see right here, or you can get it in blue or black. Now, these speakers retail for $1,000 a pair, although sometimes they may go on sale, but for the sake of argument, they retail for $1,000. So if you're in the market for a set of compact speakers in this price range, now it's time to go over what their performance is like and to determine whether or not something like this would work for you. Let's go. Okay, so I'm going to film the rest of this review in just one take without any breaks, because when you get right down to it, this is a speaker that has a very distinct way of doing things, and it's something you're either going to love or not so much. But to help give you all a better understanding as to who this is for, let's start off by going over the general character of the L52 first. So what I think most of you will experience when you take these out of the box, assuming you don't immediately mess with the tone control, is a V-curve presentation, meaning the treble and the bass is going to be emphasized. And the net result of this voicing is a little speaker that plays with a lot of enthusiasm. It's going to project sound out into your room in a forward and lively way. It's going to be highly detailed, and yet there's still going to be good and a surprising amount of punch from a small speaker this size. And really, this is exactly what I would expect from a little JBL. Now, is it still going to be to everybody's taste? No, but to help you gain an even better understanding, let's dive into more details, starting with the treble. Now, in my opinion, the treble is the selling point behind the L52 because you can customize it to your taste. Now, I admit that out of the box, though, without messing with the tone control, yeah, these speakers are pretty zesty, and it's a sound you're either going to love or not. I mean, if you listen to a lot of music with electric guitars and drums, then you're probably going to love it because out of the box, these speakers do a great job of capturing the energy and tone of those instruments. However, if you're somebody who doesn't like a lot of high frequency information, or you're somebody who listens to a lot of poorly recorded material, the treble can probably be too much for you, and you'll find yourself fatigued after a short amount of listening. But the good news is, you don't have to put up with all of that treble. You can attenuate it to your taste. And what I've done is I've had the treble attenuated to the halfway point, and this has given me the best balance between clarity and a presentation that I can listen to for hours without fatigue. Now, another comment about the treble before I move on. Outside of the voicing traits of this speaker, the quality of the treble itself is actually pretty good. It's highly detailed and resolving. It sounds great at low listening volumes. In fact, if you're upgrading from more of an affordable set of bookshelf speakers, you're probably going to enjoy what you hear from the L52 in terms of resolution, and you're going to immediately hear where your money has gone. It's going to feel like a worthwhile upgrade. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the mid-range. So it's really interesting because if you listen to the speaker in a big room or you don't mess with the tone control at all, then the mid-range may actually come across as a little bit thin to your ears. But as soon as you listen to the speaker in a smaller space, and especially if you attenuate the treble a little bit, you're going to find that no, the mid-range is actually fairly decent in scale. And if anything, it takes on a slightly warm sound thanks to a bump in the lower mid-range. Now, is it the quickest mid-range you're ever going to hear? No, but it's reasonably clear and it has a very fun tone to the sound. In fact, in some respects, it almost reminds me of my Harbeth P3 ESRs, at least a little bit. Now let's go ahead and talk about the bass. So the bass is really interesting because how you experience the bass out of this speaker will depend largely on setup. If you have the speaker close to wall, then you're going to get strong bass output. But the trade-off is that you're going to sacrifice clarity in exchange for all of that bass power. And while you get good bass power, make no mistake, this isn't going to dig low like a subwoofer. If you're a bass head, you will likely still need a subwoofer. But again, this speaker is meant to sound fun, so I don't mind that extra bass boost down low. But if you want the cleanest bass output out of these speakers, then you will need to move them away from a wall boundary. I'd recommend a good 6 to 8 inches in order to get that nice mix between clarity and punch. But overall, yeah, the bass does have a slightly warm sound, and it's meant to sound fun instead of being that audiophile speaker that's just completely neutral and quick and clean at all times. Next, let's talk about dynamic output. Not much to say here. It's adequate for something its size. It's not going to amaze you, but it doesn't sound like it's dynamically restrained for a speaker of its type. Next, let's talk about imaging. So this is going to be a big thing. While the speaker lays down a decent soundstage, as most two-way monitors do, it's not going to give you that 3D enveloping-like soundstage. Instead, it's going to be more limited to the physical plane of the loudspeaker, and what the JBLs do is a good job on focusing the sound in between the speakers. So if you know you like that, then you're not going to have any problems with the imaging. But if you want more that the speakers are disappearing and I don't know where they are in my room effect, then yeah, you're probably not going to like them very much. You're usually going to know exactly where the sound is coming from. So the other thing I need to mention here is music. So while these speakers perform well with a wide variety of music, where they shine, and I'm so happy they do this, is with music from the 80s, the 60s, and the 70s. And it doesn't even matter if it's pop or rock. They just sound so natural with that music. And that makes me so happy because they look the part, and I'm glad to know that they sound the part. Now, these speakers ultimately do a lot well. I think they're a lot of fun to listen to, but are they for everybody? Well, no. I mean, for starters, they're small speakers. They're not for somebody who expects big sound from a set of small speakers. If that's what you're looking for, then go ahead and buy Buchardts. It's also not for somebody who listens at loud volumes of, say, 85 and especially 90 dB and above. If that's you, then you're going to need bigger speakers. And lastly, as with every hi-fi product that exists, they're not going to make everybody happy in terms of their sound. Sometimes you just need to try it out for yourself to see if it's something that works for you. But the other caveats that I have is that these are not the most efficient speakers in the world, meaning that if you want to get good performance out of them, then you need to pair them up with high quality electronics. So that means if you plan on running them with an affordable AV receiver or a stereo receiver, yeah, you're probably going to be disappointed with the sound. You really need to connect them to a decent power amp or a decent integrated amplifier. And that leads me to the type of components that these speakers actually sound pretty good with. So ultimately, when it comes to power requirements, I think a good 50 to 60 watts per channel or higher is where most people will want to be. And when it comes to the type of components that sound good with the JBL L52s, well, now we're in subjective territory, right? Now, in my biased opinion, I think these speakers sound best with warm sounding components. I mean, don't get me wrong, they'll sound good with Audiolab and Emotiva and Class D amplifiers, but I don't think you're going to quite understand like the musicality, so to speak, behind the speaker until you pair them up to something that has a warm sound. And in my experience, the best match for the money by far, and I know some of you are going to roll your eyes with this, but is the IOTAVX SA3. I mean, talk about value for your money. I mean, just great sound, whether it's in a desktop environment or more in a traditional audiophile environment. I mean, so long as it's usable power for you, that is a fantastic match for your money. And I think the cutoff point as far as the value of electronics that you should use with these speakers would be around, I would say, $2,000. I mean, they're not the most resolving speakers in the world, so after that point, they're just not going to show you what your electronics are capable of. So the ideal sweet spot, I would say, is between $500 and maybe, to stretch it out, $1,500-ish, give or take. So now let's talk about what you can do to get really good sound out of these speakers. So the good news is it doesn't take a whole lot to get consistent performance out of them, but as with most compact two-way monitors, they definitely sound better in small listening rooms, like say in an apartment, in a condo, just a small room in general. And in my opinion, they sound fantastic in a desktop environment. I'll go ahead and talk about that later. Now, another thing is, if you plan on using them in more of a traditional two-channel stereo setup, then I would advise putting them on 28-inch stands. Now, you don't have to go crazy with it. You can just get something from Monoprice. You don't have to go ham. And the other thing that you need to do in order to get the best sound out of them, as I mentioned earlier, is you want to give them at least a little bit of room to breathe in order to get the best imaging and the best bass quality. Again, this is not necessary to have a good time with these speakers. They were never meant to be accurate or neutral. They were meant to have a coloration. So if you can't do it, don't think that you're going to miss out on good sound. It's just, if you want to get the best out of them, then that's what you should do. Now, free things that you can try is to try out toe-in. I seem to like these speakers with a decent amount of toe-in. I also prefer the sound with the grills on because I think that gives me the better impression of driver integration between the tweeter and the woofer. But again, this is free for you to try. There's no right or wrong answer here. And the last thing is, I think these speakers sound best with the tweeters facing inwards toward your listening position. I found when I try them outwards, yeah, the sound is, it gives you a wide sound stage, but it's diffuse. I don't think it sounds very good. But again, this is free for you to try. So I think the only other thing I need to go over here before I wrap this up are comparisons. So to be honest, I don't have another set of $1,000 bookshelf speakers to make for an apples to apples comparison here. All I can really do is talk about how I think the JBLs compete against other niche bookshelf solutions, or I shouldn't say niche, but compact bookshelf speakers in and around the same price range. So the first thing that comes to mind would be the Sound Artist LS3 5A. So for those of you who don't know, the Sound Artist LS3 5A is basically a Chinese clone of the original British LS3 5A. And while it doesn't give you the same exact sound, I think it captures the spirit of that sound at a relatively affordable price, which I believe is still being sold for $600. So the big question is, can the JBLs justify the additional cost? And in my opinion, the answer is yeah. I mean, now don't get me wrong, the Sound Artists are fantastic in their own right. They do the LS3 5A thing of giving you a lot of detail without it being overbearing, while at the same time giving you pretty good tone within the mid-range and the bass. But what the JBLs bring to the table, I mean, first and foremost, there's the nameplate, right? I mean, there's a lot more ownership pride in owning something from JBL than Sound Artist. But beyond that, the quality of the cabinet is better on the JBLs. Then you get that tone control for the treble, so you can adjust the treble to your taste. The treble itself is going to be more inherently detailed, better sounding at low listening volumes, and just overall gives you better clarity. The mid-range, while not as tonally correct as the Sound Artist, is going to give you a bigger sense of scale while still maintaining a lot of fun. And then the bass is going to be punchier, it's going to be stronger, and ultimately I think the JBL L52 is a speaker that a lot of people may prefer just because it'll sound better with a wider variety of music. Not to take anything away from the Sound Artist. I mean, if you're somebody who likes its sound and you're big on tone, then you may still very well prefer the Sound Artist on a subjective level. But I think the JBLs, when you look at all the advantages that they bring to the table, especially the fact that they're sold in a lot of dealerships all around the world, so you may actually be able to audition them before you buy them, I think that more than justifies the price gap between them. But what happens when you compare the JBLs to something that's more expensive, like say the popular KEF LS50 Meta? I mean, God forbid you can't review a bookshelf speaker without mentioning them. And this is where things get, well, they get interesting because quite frankly, the LS50 Meta has a lot of advantages over the JBL, which it should. It's the more expensive speaker. I believe it currently retails for $1,600 a pair versus JBL's $1,000 a pair. But still, let's talk about the advantages. So number one, the KEF features a much better built cabinet. And then beyond that, when it comes to performance on a technical level, the KEF is better in most ways, especially when it comes to clarity, just from top to bottom. In fact, the treble is going to give you more detail, yet the distortion is going to be lower. The mid-range is going to sound quicker, yet at the same time more resolving. And then the bass is also going to be quicker and more resolving. And just overall, when you compare the two side by side, it's one of those moments to where you go, wow, okay, the JBLs definitely have their flavor. They're not bad, but when I step up to the KEF LS50 Metas, I definitely hear why this speaker has become so popular, and I definitely see and hear where my money is going. But just because the LS50 Meta has these advantages doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to prefer it, because not only does the JBL have the unique look, but it also has that inherently punchy sound in the lower mid-range and upper bass, which makes it sound better for rock and roll music. And then you can adjust the tweeter to your taste, and I think there's something to be said for that. So I could very well see people preferring the more imperfect sound of the JBLs over the technically superior LS50 Meta. As always, it just boils down to personal taste. Now, the last thing I need to say is that the JBL L52s perform amazingly well in a desktop environment. This is where they impress me the most, to the point where I actually had to second guess whether or not I would even keep my Harbeth P3 ESRs that cost a lot more money. Now, don't get me wrong, my Harbeth P3 ESRs are better in just about every way, right? They're better made, the sound is far more natural, the treble is just as detailed, if not more detailed, but easier on the ears, the bass is quicker, blah, 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 blah. I have no problems with the Harbeth P3 ESRs. But the thing I noticed about the JBLs is, despite their imperfections, they still allowed me to have a lot of fun listening to music. And I'm at this stage in my audiophile life to where that's what it's all about. Forget about the technical stuff. I just want to have fun listening to music as a consumer, right? And speaking of which, a fun fact about this review, I guess to wrap it all up, is these speakers are not review samples. I bought them with my own money and not on some reviewer accommodation price or for industry accommodation. In fact, I didn't even source these from a distributor or a manufacturer. I bought them when I saw them on sale, just like any of you would, because sometimes it's just more fun to try something without any timeline obligations. And I bought them with the intention of keeping them, and ultimately, I think what JBL has here is a unique solution, and that leads me to its ultimate value proposition, who I think it's really for. So look, there's a lot of competition out there and speakers in around a $1,000 price range. And do I think these are the best value in the world? No, but I don't think they're a bad value either. I think you need to look at these speakers for what they really are. A compact, retro-looking, retro-sounding speaker that gives you a decent amount of flexibility for something in this price range. And I think if you're somebody who you know what you're getting into with this speaker, especially if you listen to 80s, 60s, and 70s music, you're going to love them. But if you're coming into this with different expectations because you listen at loud volumes, you want an accurate sound, or you're looking for the presentation of a floor-standing speaker, then yeah, there's going to be better ways to spend your money. And that's how it always goes in this industry. But anyways, I think that's about it for this one-take review. Hopefully you guys took something away from it. Ultimately, yeah, I definitely think they are a good speaker for the right type of listener. Anyways, that is going to be my take on the JBL Classic L52. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.